My name is Shona Reid, and I will be talking about The History of Architecture by Walter Burley and Marion Mahony Griffin. My hypothesis states that Walter Burley and Marion Mahony Griffin were great leaders in their field. Their fateful winning of the design for Canberra led them to be two of the most important figures in shaping modern Australian architecture. Walter Burley Griffin was born in Illinois, USA in 1876. As a boy, he was interested in landscape design and was said to have landscaped the backyard of his childhood home. He later went on to attend the University of Illinois, and he graduated in 1899 with a degree in architecture. He stayed in Chicago for the first 15 years of his career, where he worked in the offices of Steinway Hall. During these years he met Marion Mahony, and they married in 1911. His time in America was productive and inspiring, and he was under the influence of famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright. Burley Griffin was largely inspired by the City Beautiful and Garden City movements of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The influence these had upon him showed in his design for Canberra, Australia's capital city. Together, the Griffins entered a competition for this very design. Out of 137 entries, theirs won. They arrived in Australia in 1914 and began to implement the plans for what was to become Canberra. The original plans for the city by the Griffins involved much symmetry, open space, and central focus. The main roads were surrounded by large circular plots, each designed for a particular use, and were undeniably inspired by the Garden City movement. This movement proposed that a planned city should be concentric, make the most of the landscape, and section off different areas of industry and society. Griffin was enticed by the native flora of Australia, and he tried wherever he could to keep the natural surroundings intact in his plans. He proposed that the Molonglo River be the water source for an artificial lake, with basins that would create symmetry in the city, but also a natural look. Griffin envisioned Capitol Hill to be the main feature, with the basin design of the lake complementing it. There were objections to Griffin's designs, however, and it was debated over because of the excessive costs involved. And so, after 6 long years of the Griffins being in Canberra, almost nothing had been achieved. Too many obstacles were made by the opposition of some politicians towards Griffin's plans, and so he decided to abandon the project. After the Griffins left Canberra, most work on the city came to a halt. However, in the 1950s and 60s, Prime Minister Robert Menzies decided to further develop the capital. In doing so, many of Griffin's original designs were used with slight moderations. This demonstrates just how brilliant Griffin's designs were, and although it was not instant, his plans were given the credit they deserved. In the 1980s, Griffin's vision for Capitol Hill to be the central focus of the city came true when Parliament House was built, and in the 1960s, Lake Burley Griffin was opened and named after the man himself. Griffin's and Mahony's careers led them both to head south, to Melbourne. Here, they worked mostly together, commissioning a range of buildings. These included Cafe Australia, Newman College at the University, the Capitol Theatre, and Capitol House. They also designed residential houses and suburban areas. Their designs for these buildings were unique and created a new style in Melbourne architecture. For example, the intricate interior design of the Capitol Theatre offered a third entertainment during the intermission, according to Victorian architect Robin Boyd. The eclectic arrangement of the roof and walls in the theatre were, at the time, unseen anywhere else. His design of the Newman College in the University of Melbourne is also an example of his creativeness. The dome, which comprises of the main dining hall, creates a unique area. The numerous spikes and the cross decorating the exterior of the dome are somewhat a revival of Gothic architecture, with Griffin's own modern twist. Griffin's notion of making public spaces entertaining and beautiful started an age of architects who began to experiment. During the 20th century, architects emerged with ideas of creating more space, more light, using more materials, and less conventionality in their designs. Walter Burley Griffin was better known, however, for designing houses and residential areas. In Sydney, he set about designing the suburb of Castlecrag. His vision for the area was to have no constraints or restrictions on the land, and to create a sense of community through the architecture. In an article by Nora Cooper in Australian Home Beautiful, it states that Castlecrag was to have no fences, no boundaries, no red roofs to spoil the Australian landscape. These are some of the features that will distinguish Castlecrag. This open-plan living was new to Sydney, and some of the proposals were declined by the authorities, such as Griffin's 5-mile waterfront idea. However, his plans of keeping the houses away from busy streets and ensuring every resident had a magnificent view were happily accepted by all. As he had always been interested in landscape design, Griffin made sure to keep the suburban area a natural paradise. He designed parks and suggested that the trees be left to grow along with the rest of the native flora. Griffin had a hatred for the traditional designs of Australian suburbs as they were mechanical and allowed no considerations for the natural surrounding environment. The actual houses of Castlecrag were also mainly Griffin's designs. His plans were to make the houses blend in with the surrounding cliffs and boulders characteristic of the area. He built many of the houses out of the same stone that naturally occurred in Castlecrag, and from the outside some camouflaged very effectively. His houses typically had flat roofs, rock slabs and pillars as part of the exterior design. These houses could be seen as the turning point for modern designs, especially eco-friendly homes that make the most of their natural surrounds. Since they were flat, it was possible to grow gardens on the roofs. This meant that more vegetation could be put into the environment to replace what was removed by the building. The rock slabs also being sourced locally meant minimal transportation and energy was used to build these houses. Since the open spaces made the most of the natural breeze and sunlight, energy bills also would have been low. Griffin's sustainable homes revolutionised designs for future architecture. Walter Burley Griffin was also quite a philosophical man. He believed in the work he did, and that buildings reflected human nature. Here is a short clip of Griffin explaining his view on architecture.
Buildings are the most subtle, accurate, and enduring records of life. I like to believe that buildings convey the most truth of the mental and spiritual states of various peoples and times. In the aggregate, the architecture of a people represents the greatest amount of human effort applied to the realization of purely human ideals.
Marion Mahony Griffin was an architect in her own right, and although she collaborated on many projects with her husband, she also had her own designs. In Australia, she was a drawer, a writer and a designer. She drew many of the designs which her and her husband commissioned, including the plan for Canberra. When they first arrived in Sydney, Mahony wrote a couple of articles on architecture for an Australian magazine. She worked with her husband on the plans for the Capitol Theatre, which some say she designed, the Newman College, and other projects. She was also involved in theatre production for a short period, working mainly in costume design. Mahony's works may be overlooked due to the fame and influence of her husband, and it will never really be known exactly what she designed. Walter Burley and Marion Mahony Griffin's careers in Australia were highly successful, and their innovative designs contributed much to modern Australian architecture. The design of Canberra by the Griffins was functional, symmetrical and beautiful, and this is what won them the competition. Once in Australia, the Griffins began to implement their Garden City-inspired ideas. However, because of much debating by the opposition, they were forced to quit. Only later was the work of the couple recognised in Canberra, and can still be seen today. Burley Griffin's designs were inspired by nature and how buildings can reflect the people and the times of when they are built. In Melbourne, the plans for the Capitol Theatre, Newman College and various residential houses were influenced by his philosophy. In Sydney, Walter Burley Griffin had the task of designing the large suburb or community of Castlecrag. His designs showed creativity and ability to use what is readily available, including the rock material of the area. He wanted to keep the natural surrounds of Castlecrag intact, and by doing so, his houses became environmentally friendly and have possibly led the way for the future. His and Marion Mahony's influence can still be seen in architectural designs of today. Their unique ability to create spaces which were outside of the rules of conventional and normal has had resounding effects. The Capitol Theatre's intricate ceiling, the Newman College's distinctive dome, and Castle Craig's revolutionary houses have all had a most important impact on modern Australian architecture.